Hey church, the Christmas season is here, and that means Christmas Mall is right around the corner. Maybe you're asking yourself, what is this Christmas Mall? Everyone keeps talking about it. Christmas Mall is an incredible opportunity for us to invite families in our community, in our church, into a space full of brand new toys for them to shop for their children free of cost. But more than the gifts, it's about building relationship. It's about the opportunity we have to build connection, to find out prayer requests, to pray with families, to share the gospel, and to bring the body of Christ together to wrap around our community. Every year, Christmas Mall serves hundreds of families. Thousands of children are impacted, but there's no way we can do it without you. There is a place for every person to serve. So grab your family, grab your coworkers, the neighbor down the street, or your life group and get involved. We need people who love gift wrap. We need people who love to greet or to carry gifts or provide security. Just get involved. Christmas Mall may look a little bit different at each campus, so be sure to check out your campus page to find out how you can get involved. Whatever it is, don't miss out on this opportunity to make an impact and to be a part of what God is doing in our cities this holiday season.
All right, Christmas Mall's coming up, and many of you have been a part of that before. If maybe you're new and you've never experienced Christmas Mall, it is an opportunity for us we pull out all the chairs out of the auditorium, we have tables set up, and it's an opportunity for families in our community, for parents or guardians to come and shop for toys for their kids. And there's kids that are blessed with toys who otherwise they might not have an opportunity to get toys this Christmas season. And so they come in, we have people that shop with them, people that pray with them. And so we need your help though. I've mentioned before that it takes an army of volunteers to pull it off. So whether you want to be a shopper that's shopping with the parents, or you want to be an elf that's carrying the gifts out to the cars, or maybe you want to pray with people, maybe wrapping is your thing and so you want to be a gift wrapper, there is a place for you. Maybe you want to be a part of the setup team or the teardown team, but you can sign up by texting CLV to 88,000. Also, we've got a box out in the lobby. We're taking donations for wrapping paper, for tape, for scissors, for ribbon, bows, all the things needed to wrap gifts. You can bring those on a Sunday morning, drop those off in the lobby. And then also, if you know what, maybe you say, well, I'm not able to be here to serve, but I'd like to give towards some of these toys and these gifts being purchased. You can do that on our website at newlifechurch.tv/giving. Select the Clarksville location and then select Christmas Mall. All of that information is in your service guide as well. But we are really excited this Christmas season about Christmas Mall, but it's not quite Thanksgiving yet. But Thanksgiving is this week. And so in just a few, happy Thanksgiving, by the way, in case I don't get to tell you later. So in just a few short days, many of you are going to gather around tables with family for some quality time. You're going to eat a lot of food. You might play some games. You might watch some football if that's your thing. Then some of you will eat some more food after that, followed probably by some more food. And then my favorite part of Thanksgiving, the Thanksgiving Day nap. How many of you love some nap time? Come on, can I get an amen? Yeah. But that's not the story for everybody's Thanksgiving. In fact, for some in the room this morning, the idea of getting together with your family for Thanksgiving may cause some stress. Maybe there's some tension there. Maybe there's some unresolved conflict or family drama. In fact, just earlier this week, I was talking to a lady and I was asking her, what are your plans for Thanksgiving? And she said, we'll probably go to my parents' house for Thanksgiving, but we probably won't go to my husband's parents' house. And I said, why not? She said, because every time we do, somebody gets in a fist fight. Now, I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. She was serious. And see, the truth is, Thanksgiving isn't a relaxing time for every family. In fact, I was just reading this week about a recent survey that was done throughout the United States, across all 50 states, and they surveyed people that normally celebrate Thanksgiving to ask about their Thanksgiving plans. And the survey came back to show that 1/4 of all of those surveyed throughout the United States say that they are considering not having Thanksgiving with extended family because they're concerned about family conflict and drama. 1/4 of all Americans are considering skipping Thanksgiving. And also interesting was 59% of those surveyed are worried about political disagreements causing tension at their Thanksgiving lunch. Now, maybe you're not concerned about Thanksgiving, but how many of you would say at some point or another in my family, whether it's your immediate family or your extended family, you'd say at some point or another, we have had some conflict? Would you just lift your hand this morning? That's going to be all of us. We all experience conflict. Some of you had conflict on the way to church this morning. And I won't ask you to lift your hands. You know who you are. But we all deal with conflict from time to time in our homes. And listen, we want our homes, we want our families, we want our Thanksgiving get together to be characterized by peacefulness, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it's characterized by stress, by drama, by tension. And it's amazing how often we slip into these dysfunctional cycles in our families. For example, many of you know that Leah and I, we have two girls, Chloe and Olivia, and when they were younger, they used to love to wrestle. I thought having girls, maybe that wouldn't happen so much, but they did. They loved to wrestle, and it always went the same way. We'd hear them laughing and giggling, and then all of a sudden, you'd hear crying. Then you have to go in there, and somebody's whining because she hit me, or she bit me, or she kicked me, or she pulled my hair, or whatever it is. So then as the parent, you tell them, okay, stop, no more wrestling. Then you go into the other room, and then before long, what do you hear? You hear wrestling and laughing and giggling, and then somebody gets hurt, and somebody's whining, and somebody's crying, and it's a cycle. But unfortunately, it's the same cycle that many of us get in as adults. Somebody gets hurt because of a disagreement, and then we whine and complain about it. We throw a fit, and then we end up right back in it again. And somebody gets hurt, we wrestle, we get hurt, then we do it again. We wrestle, we get hurt, we do it again. And so the question that I think we have to ask is, this Thanksgiving season, or maybe just in general, how can we have peace? I mean, when statistics are saying that 1/4 of Americans are going to skip Thanksgiving to avoid the drama, how can we have peace? And let me just say this too. Some of you are here this morning and you're thinking, well, I don't have any drama in my family. I won't have any tension this Thanksgiving. And if that's the case, that's great and that's fantastic. But you do deal with drama somewhere in your life. There is tension somewhere. There is struggle somewhere. There is conflict in your life, because anywhere there are people, there's bound to be problems, because we are imperfect. We are all flawed. We have all fallen short of the glory of God. So whether it's at Thanksgiving lunch, or whether it's Christmas morning, whether it's at work, whether it's at school, whether it's in your marriage or with your kids or with your parents, or on Facebook or at the grocery store or at church, we all deal with conflict. And so we're going to look to God's word to help us today. And we're going to have a lot of content. So if you're a note taker, I would encourage you to really lean in and take some notes. But we're going to look at the words of Jesus this morning from Matthew's Gospel, Matthew chapter 5. And we see Jesus teaching a crowd of people. And he shares a series of verses that we have come to know as the Beatitudes. And I want to look specifically at one of these in Matthew 5, verse 9, when Jesus says, blessed are the peace, what? Everybody help me out. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are the peacemakers. Now, when Jesus said this, it was very countercultural to the world that he lived in. You see, during this time, his audience, his listeners, they were more of the mindset of eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Somebody hurts you, you hurt them back. And unfortunately, that's still our culture today for many of us. Somebody spouts something off to you, you make a comment right back. Somebody writes you a mean text, you type one back. Somebody writes you a mean email, you send one back. Somebody cuts you off in traffic, you do whatever it is that you do. But everybody during this time, it was countercultural for Jesus to say what he said, but Jesus says there is another way. See, he's making a statement that there's a higher calling for those of you who say you're going to follow me. There's a higher expectation. Now, I want you to notice something Jesus doesn't say. Jesus doesn't say, blessed are the peacekeepers. He says, blessed are the peacemakers. Now, what's the difference? If you're taking notes this morning, a peacekeeper works around conflict. A peacekeeper works around conflict. That's not who Jesus is calling us to be. A peacekeeper says, let's just avoid the conflict and pretend it's not there. We'll be together as a family, but we won't talk about the issues. We won't talk about the problems. We'll go through our routine as if everything's okay, and we won't deal with it. But then one day, somebody just goes crazy and blows up and screams at everybody. And what happened? There was unresolved conflict that had not been dealt with because the conflict had been worked around. Peacekeepers work around the conflict, but Jesus calls us to be peacemakers. So what does a peacemaker do? A peacemaker works through the conflict. Peacemakers work through the conflict. Now, let me say this in saying that a peacemaker works through the conflict. That doesn't mean that as followers of Jesus, we just go looking for the conflict. Like, I'm going to go work through some conflict and figure out what their problem is. I'm going to fix it. No, because we all know those people who want to stick their nose in everybody's business and try to fix the problem. That's not what we're talking about. But what he's saying is as peacemakers, when there is conflict, when it arises, we're going to work through it, not around it. And I love what Paul says in Romans chapter 12, verse 18. He says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, turn to the person next to you, tell them, that's you. Go ahead and tell them that. That's you. Take your finger, everybody go like this. Take your finger right here. Point it back at yourself. Say, that's me. That's me. This is who Jesus is talking about. He's talking about me. It's my responsibility. As far as it depends on me, what am I supposed to do? Live at peace. Now, let me pause right there. This phrase, live at peace, in the original Greek language is a verb requiring action. So it literally means to make peace. It means to create peace, to cultivate peace. It requires action on our part. So Paul is saying that if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, then you create the peace, you cultivate the peace, you make the peace with who? Everyone. Now, if you were here a couple of weeks ago when we talked about who is my neighbor, we learned that a neighbor is everyone, everywhere. And so we are being called by Jesus to make peace with everyone. Now, who is everyone? Well, it's everyone. That means if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace, make peace, create peace with your in-laws, create peace with your ex, make peace with slow drivers. As far as it depends on you, create peace with your coworkers, with people who voted differently than you, with people who have different opinions than you, with people who love cats. How many cat lovers do we have in the house? We got any cat lovers? Okay, good. The minority. That's all right. As fully devoted followers of Christ, we're not just going to be peacekeepers. We're not going to avoid the conflict, but we're going to be peacemakers, meaning we are going to work through the conflict. We're going to do everything in our power as far as it depends on us to make peace. But if we're going to be peacemakers, what does that look like? Like what does that mean for us? Well, as peacemakers, the first thing I would say is this. Number one, we're going to speak the truth in love. We're going to speak the truth in love. Paul wrote in Ephesians 4:15 that we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ. We speak the truth in love. We don't avoid the hard conversations. We have the hard conversations because we are peacemakers, not peacekeepers. So sometimes that means that we have to say some hard things. Sometimes we have to tell some hard truths. Sometimes we have to have some conversations. Sometimes we have to be very direct. But can I also say that how you have those conversations and how you say those truths can also be the difference in peace and conflict? Because notice, it doesn't say we yell the truth in love, but we tell the truth in love. We speak the truth in love. There's a couple of things that I've learned over the years when it comes to speaking truth in love. And I'm not in any way saying that I have this figured out or that I always ace it or that I always do it right by any means. But I do want to share these couple of things with you because I think that they might help you when it comes to being peacemakers, working through conflict, and speaking truth in love. The first thing is this, that when we speak the truth in love, we're going to do it during non-conflict times. Now, that might not always work, but this is the goal, that when we have to have the hard conversations, we're going to try to have the hard conversation when it's not in the middle of a conflict time. Like if somebody's throwing a shoe at your head, that's not the best time to try to have the conversation probably. Sometimes you got to wait for people to calm down. Sometimes you've got to circle back around, maybe a few hours later, maybe the next day, maybe a few days later, and have the conversation and say the hard things that need to be said. The second thing is we're going to make sure that we're attacking the issue, not the person. When we're having a hard conversation, when we're saying the hard things, when we're speaking the hard truths, we're going to make sure that we're attacking the issue, not the person. What they did might be hurtful. What they said might be hurtful. But they're not the enemy. In fact, here's what Paul says in Ephesians 6:12. He says, for we, that's us, Christians, the church, we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies. In other words, we're not fighting against people, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places, or in other words, in the spiritual realm, in the spiritual places. That's who we're fighting against. Your issue is not that person that you have conflict. It's a spiritual battle. So if we want to bring peace, if we want to make peace, if we want to cultivate peace, then we're going to speak truth in love by attacking the issue, not the person, during non-conflict times. So as peacemakers, we'll tell the truth in love. But the second thing we're going to do as peacemakers is this. We're going to apologize when we are wrong. As peacemakers, we're going to apologize when we are wrong. Because remember, being a peacemaker requires action. It doesn't just happen. We have to take the steps. It means when we're wrong, we apologize. And just a few verses down from this teaching of Jesus where he's talking about being a peacemaker, listen to what he says in Matthew 5:23. He says, if you're about to place your gift on the altar, now what he's talking about here is this was a way that people during this time that they came and they worshiped God. This was the way that they received forgiveness for their sins. He says, if you're about to place your gift on the altar and you remember that someone is angry with you, then you leave your gift there in front of the altar. And then look at what he says. Make peace with that person, then come back and offer your gift to God. So what is Jesus saying? He's saying, the point that he's making is that we can't worship God with a sincere heart if we are unrepentant and unwilling to admit our fault to the person that we have wronged. We can't enter into the presence of God in sincere, intimate worship if we know that we should be apologizing to somebody and we're not doing it. But can we be honest? Apologizing isn't always easy. Would you agree with that? Some of you are far more holy than I am. Apologizing is not always easy, and it's easier for some than others. Like in mine and Leah's relationship, for example, in our marriage, one of us has a problem with apologizing. I'm not going to tell you which one because Leah doesn't like for people to know that about her, but I'm joking, kind of. But no, seriously. I share this with her permission. But when she was growing up, I asked her if I could share it. When she was growing up as a child, apologizing was not something that she really saw modeled in her home. And some families, you just don't see that as much. And so she never really heard her parents apologize to one another. They never apologized to the kids. The kids didn't apologize. Like, it just wasn't something they did. And so when we got married, she brought that into our relationship. And it was some conflict that we had to work through. Now, I'm thankful to say that it's not that way anymore. And we have worked through that. But maybe for you, that's where you are. Like, maybe apologizing is really hard for you. Maybe it's because of the way that you were raised. Maybe it's because you're stubborn. Like, whatever the reason might be, maybe apologizing is tough for you. But in order to be a peacemaker, we have to be willing sometimes to humble ourselves, to take the difficult step, and to admit when we're wrong. Because we all mess up, and we all get it wrong. And there's a time for all of us when we need to apologize and we need to say, I was wrong. But I do think that there is a right way to apologize and there are wrong ways to apologize. And I wrote it in my notes this way. When we apologize as peacemakers, we want to admit specific actions without excuses. We want to admit specific actions without excuses. Here's what I did. Here's what I said. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. We don't just say, well, I'm sorry, but I wouldn't have done that if you wouldn't have blank. That's not an apology. We don't say, well, I'm sorry you got your feelings hurt, you big baby. No, that's not an apology, though that might be what we want to say. An apology is, I was wrong. Please forgive me. And let me just say this. For somebody in the room today, you taking the initiative to reach out to that person that you've hurt or that you've wronged in your family, you taking the initiative to reach out and say, I'm sorry, could be the difference in a peaceful Thanksgiving lunch together or a stress-filled Thanksgiving lunch together. In fact, I know of a family right now, I'm thinking of a family that the brother of the family has made some bad choices in life. And because of his bad choices, the sister has said some things about him. And he found out what the sister had said, and now he has said, I'm not coming to any more family gatherings. I won't be at Thanksgiving. I'm not coming to Christmas until she apologizes. And she's not apologizing. She's saying, well, I'm not apologizing. And so now this family is divided and not whole because somebody won't apologize. But Jesus has called us to be peacemakers, and as peacemakers, it's our responsibility to take the step, to take the initiative to apologize. Paul, a couple chapters later, in Romans chapter 14, he says, let us therefore make every effort to do what leads to peace and to mutual edification. Let us make every effort to do what leads to peace. So let me ask you this morning, what's the effort that you need to make? Because maybe there's some tension, maybe there's some stress in a relationship, whether it's with your family or maybe it's somebody else, just another relationship in your life. But what's the effort that you need to make? Because for some of you, you might need to make the phone call. And you might need to say, I'm sorry. Maybe you need to write the letter. Maybe you need to send the text message. Maybe you need to show up on their doorstep. Maybe you need to schedule a meeting. Whatever it is, and listen, please understand, I'm not saying that you should apologize every time whether you're wrong or not. That's not what I'm saying. If you're not the one in the wrong, you're not expected to apologize. But as a peacemaker, I do believe you're called to take the first step to reconcile that relationship. So even if that person's wrong, maybe you just reach out and you say, listen, I know that there's an issue here, and I really want to try to work through it. Paul says, as far as it depends on you. So that means you take the step, you reach out. If they're unwilling to receive it, if they're unwilling to have a conversation, that's on them. But as a peacemaker, you say, I'm going to take the step to try, as far as it depends on me, I'm going to make every effort to do what I can to resolve this issue. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. So what are we going to do? We're going to tell the truth in love. We're going to apologize when we're wrong. The third thing is this. We're going to forgive when we've been hurt. We're going to forgive when we've been hurt. Paul writes in Colossians 3:13, he says, make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember that the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Now, I want to approach this part of the message very gently, because I know that there are those of you in this room right now that you've experienced very deep, very significant hurt from another person. Maybe it was someone that you thought you could trust and they lied and they deceived you. Maybe it was someone that you thought would always be faithful, but they weren't faithful. Maybe it was someone who you looked up to and they hurt you and they abused you. They took advantage of you. And you hear me say that we should forgive as we've been forgiven. And you think, Jordan, there's no way. There's no way that I could forgive that person for what they've done. And please hear me and know that I'm in no way saying this will be easy. I'm not saying you should just be able to forgive them, walk out the door, that's it, that's the end of it, no more. No. It's not easy. But I do want to share with you a story from the Old Testament about a young guy by the name of Joseph. And if you've heard me talk about forgiveness before, if you've been coming for a while, chances are you've heard me use this story, because I think there's some really great information in it about what forgiveness is and what it isn't. Because I think one of the struggles that we sometimes have with forgiveness is there are some misconceptions surrounding forgiveness, and we don't completely understand what it is and what it isn't. And so if you're unfamiliar with Joseph, I can't read it all to you because it is a long story, but it is found in Genesis chapter 37, 38, 39. It's a fantastic story. But when Joseph was a young guy, God puts a dream in his heart that one day you will be the ruler of a nation. One day you will save a nation. One day your brothers, your family will bow to you. Now, if I'm Joseph, that's pretty exciting. But the mistake Joseph makes is he tells his brothers about this dream. And if you have a sibling, you know that you probably wouldn't get too excited about your sibling being like, hey, one of these days, you're going to bow to me. No, that didn't work out so well. So his brothers, Joseph was one of 12 brothers. 11 of his brothers get together. They devise a plan to murder their brother. But then they decide, you know what? Instead of killing him, we can profit from our brother. And so they sell him into slavery. He ends up in the home of a man by the name of Potiphar. In this home, as a servant, as a slave, Joseph is then wrongly accused for putting the moves on Potiphar's wife, which he never did. He then ends up in prison as a prisoner in a cell. All this time remembering the promise of God and probably thinking, if it wouldn't have been for my brothers, I wouldn't be here right now. But then ultimately, Joseph interprets a dream for a man in prison. That man gets out. He works for Pharaoh. He remembers Joseph. They get Joseph out of prison. Joseph then steps into his destiny as Pharaoh's number 2 and then ultimately saves a nation from famine. Now, at the end of the story, here's what I want you to hear. Joseph's brothers show up. They don't recognize him. They think that he's dead by now or in slavery somewhere. But they show up and Joseph recognizes them and they are there to beg for food because it's famine. There is no food. But because of Joseph's wisdom, he has saved this nation and they've put away all of this food and people come from all over begging for food. And so the brothers show up and they say, can we please have some food? And so now Joseph has a decision to make. I can get my revenge. I can send him away with no food. I can have him killed. I can have him thrown in prison. I can have him executed. I can do whatever I want because I'm in charge. Or I can forgive. And when you read the story, that's what you see Joseph do. And I want to show you a few things that we learn from Joseph's story about what forgiveness is and what it isn't. The first thing, if you're taking notes, is this. Number one, forgiving doesn't mean we forget. Forgiving doesn't mean that we forget. In fact, when you read the story, you see when the brothers show up in front of Joseph and they don't recognize him. And Joseph says to his brothers, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery. He hasn't forgotten. And there are those of you in the room today that you have been hurt by somebody and you've tried to forgive them, but you can't forget it. And so you've believed the lie, if I can't forget it, then evidently I haven't forgiven them, and you've just given up. But listen to me, God never asked you to forget. You can't forget the pain. You can't forget the hurt. You can't forget the heartache. He never told you to forget. You can't. It's not humanly possible. But you can forgive. But you don't have to forget. But you can forgive. So be encouraged this morning that if you have someone in your life that you need to forgive, just because you haven't forgotten doesn't mean you haven't forgiven them. But the second thing that we learn from Joseph about what forgiveness isn't, is forgiving doesn't mean that everything goes back to normal. In Joseph's life, things were different now. He had forgiven his brothers, but he wouldn't go back to being the brother that's pushed around by his brothers anymore. He wouldn't go back to being the brother that's bullied. No, he was now in a place of authority. He was now a leader. They would now look to him. They would now bow to him. So just because you've forgiven someone doesn't mean that things always go back to normal with that person. But then the third thing we learn is that forgiving does mean that we're open to the future. Forgiveness is not saying, yeah, you're forgiven, but you're dead to me. That's not forgiveness. In fact, Joseph even told his brothers in Genesis, he said, I will care for you and for your children. Things wouldn't look the way that they always had, but Joseph was open to a future with his brothers. Now, please understand this morning that I am in no way telling someone to put yourself back into a harmful situation. I'm in no way telling you to allow an abusive or manipulative person back into your life. I'm just saying that, like Paul said, that as far as it depends on you, you pursue peace. There will be situations when the person in your life that hurt you, that they can be a part of your life. But there will be situations for some when that person can no longer be a part of your life. And I understand that this morning. But if it's possible, as far as it depends on you, pursue peace with that person. But Jordan, how can I do that? Again, I'm not going to make it sound like it's easy. I was just talking to somebody after first service who said that this really spoke to them. And one thing that they've learned is that forgiveness is not a one-time decision, but it's a daily choice. That every day you wake up and you say, today I choose to forgive them. Because the memories will come back. And the hurt and the pain will replay in your mind. So every day, for some of you, you may have to say, today I choose to forgive. But forgiveness is possible, and here's how I know that. Because the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead is the same Spirit that is living inside of us. And He helps us to love like Jesus, and He helps us to forgive like Jesus. And I don't know about you, but God has forgiven me for a lot. More than I could ever keep track of, more than I could ever take count of. God has forgiven me of a lot. I couldn't deserve it. I couldn't earn it. He's forgiven me freely. And that's how God calls us to forgive. Freely. We forgive as we have been forgiven. I'm going to leave you with this verse this morning in Ephesians 4, verse 32. Paul says, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other. How? Just as in Christ, God forgave you. That's the secret. We don't forgive in our own strength or in our own ability, but we forgive in the strength of Jesus. Just as in Christ God forgave us, that's how we forgive others. We don't give up when it's hard. We don't write somebody off when they mess up. We don't hold grudges. We don't get bitter. We don't avoid the hard conversations. We don't try to work around the conflict. We work through the conflict. And I mentioned just a moment ago that we have two girls, Chloe and Olivia. And if you've seen our girls with Leah and I very many times, you've probably noticed that Chloe looks like Leah and Olivia looks more like me. Chloe has a lot of Leah's traits. Olivia has a lot of my traits. They look like us. And as followers of Christ, as peacemakers, when we make the decision that I'm going to be a peacemaker, I'm not just going to be a peacekeeper, but I'm going to work through the conflict, not around it. As far as it depends on me, I'm going to pursue peace. When we do that and we take these steps, do you know who we look like? We look like our Heavenly Father, because that's who He is. He is peace. Jesus is the Prince of Peace. He is our perfect peace. That word peace comes from the word shalom. And it's more than like we think of peace. It's a perfect peace. It's not just the absence of bad, but it is the greatest of good. And when we step out as a peacemaker, lives can be changed. Situations can be turned around. Relationships can be healed. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Because blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Would you bow your heads with me this morning?